Good morning to you, my friends, wherever you may be in the world today. Alan Clements here. Nice to see you wherever you may be. April 6th, 2021, a series of talks for the last few months on my own beloved Myanmar, Burma, undergoing a satanic, evil, terrorist occupation by the former military, orchestrated by the former general of the army, Min Aung Hlaing, and his newly designated terrorist organization, MASAC. Today's talk, Indoctrination and the Cultism of active coma, not paralyzed coma, but the active machinations of the human mind embodied in context, but in a comatose state to timeless values of decency, dignity, mutuality, rule of law, democracy. A comatose state to those timeless principles, yet active in acting out the conditioning of one's own indoctrination. Also known as, this talk, as a difficult topic, but I want to dive into it if you will join me. Why is the military, the former military known today as the terrorist group MASAC, why is the military run by the former general Min Aung Hlaing, now a designated terrorist, why is this military killing, terrorizing their own people? Okay. And if I may, here on April 6th, just chill, take my time. This topic of indoctrination is the central theme of the book that I just completed, Extinction X-Rated. And I would like to just freelance, if I may, as an artist, a lover of freedom, a writer, an activist, a concerned citizen of the planet, how to understand the role of indoctrination and active coma, the cultism of active coma, and also interweave in the sharing my insights after 43 years of engagement with Burma, Myanmar, why the military, the terrorist group, formerly known as the Thamada, why are they killing their own people? Okay. Thank you for tuning in today. If you are moved to be a force multiplier and share this video, and encourage your tribe, your social network to also share it, please, cool, go for it, do it. We are many, they are few. The more that we surround the evil with goodness and luminosity and truth and dignity, the more likely our children and the inhabitants, both today and of the future, will they enjoy the sanctity of peace, unity, and freedom and democracy. Okay. For those of you who don't know, I spent some years, not a long time, in the monastery in Rangoon, the Mahasi Thatanayekta. I was blessed to go there early on in my life as a young man under the guidance of the Venerable Mahasi Sayadaw. I learned Vipassana meditation, insight meditation, Satipatthana, the power of mindfulness under these learned men and, in some cases, women nuns. One of the things that I first noticed and continued to notice over the decades of my involvement in meditation, and even up to today, is, take for example, I'll just start small and simple, how those of you who know mindfulness meditation and insight meditation, we're trained to pay attention to the phenomena in the moment as best as we can. Mindfulness sees the phenomena, knows it for what it is, and understands its characteristics, both unique and universal. And so we're encouraged over and over again to pay attention to the experience at hand, correct? When we're breathing, to be aware of the breathing coming into the body. Notice the sensations, in-breath, out-breath. Notice the physical sensations of touching. We hear a sound, a thought, an image, an emotion. We note those phenomena with mindful presence. Take for eating meditation, for example. We're encouraged to include all actions, all postures, all states, all circumstances in our meditation practice. No time off. But eating meditation, for example, very easy to not notice the habitual momentum of habit. Take, for example, told when we reach for food, look at the food, we see it, we have the intention to reach, we pick it up with our chopstick or food, with our fork or our hand, we lift it to our mouths, the intention to open our mouths, place it on our tongue, we lower our fork, and we chew it mindfully, chewing, tasting, we taste the sensations, the intention to swallow, so on and so forth, okay? Sounds simple. Indoctrination. The cultism of active coma. Why is the military in Burma killing its own people? Well, my point here is, those of you who've meditated and been mindful of eating, for example, if you look around a monastery or a meditation center or the dining hall, it's very amazing to me to see how you've been encouraged and how you have committed yourself to paying attention. Chewing, tasting, and you can see the room and you can see your own mind, how it averts into the habit of distraction. Next thing you know, 3 or 4 mouthfuls of food have habitually been reached for, and you're completely unmindful of how the food got to your mouth and into your mouth and how you chewed it. And the next thing you know, you're looking around the monastery dining room, and there you are. And you see this over and over and over again. People find it nearly impossible, under the most sacred conditions, to pay attention to the phenomena of what they're doing with mindful presence. Next thing you know, they're back in the world and they've habituated to the patterning of the indoctrination of habit. Next thing you know, someone's struggling for a year or a month or a lifetime with the inability to control what they put into their mouth and how much. Say no more. I'm not trying to vilify or shame anyone with an eating disorder, but look at the amount of difficulty that people face in dealing with the cultism of self-generated habit and the inability to interrupt things that are detrimental to one's own being. Okay. When you have an outside force who is consciously, deliberately trying to create circumstances to program the mind of another being, to individually manipulate the mind of another being into a coordinated effort to do things against their own self-interest, that of their family, that of their nation, and that of the world. Pause. I wrote this book, Extinction X-Rated. I've said this numerous times. It can't be said numerous times enough. The great environmentalist out of Canada, David Suzuki, in talking about this compulsion of nearly 8 billion human beings embedded in what's known as a capitalistic, communistic, socialistic, impoverished global economy that's radically interrelated. Obviously, the pollution in Shanghai doesn't affect simply the people in that city. We are so immeasurably interconnected that he described climate collapse and the ongoing decimation of the climate and the oceans, the capacity to grow food, as humans in a car headed for the brick wall of self-annihilation. And here we are, 8 billion of us in that car, and we're arguing over where to sit, what to play on the radio, And in some cases, simply just mindfully watching our thoughts come and go as the car careens headlong into what has been described as the sixth mass human-generated extinction, taking out probably up to 80, 90, if not 95% of non-humans as well. We're in that process. How long before we hit the wall? How long will it take before there is human extinction? What will the collapse look like? How can we adjust to dystopian futures? These are very tragically difficult existential issues. And we ask the question, how can Burma's military kill their own people? And I just draw a parallel here. How can human beings kill all people, their own people, and non-humans? So reframing the question, not so much to shame or to vilify the terrorist organization Mossack in Burma, more than they're already shaming themselves, but to psychologically and existentially frame the issue into the bigger issues and also get deeper into the smaller issues like meditation, eating meditation, global consumerism, trying to trace back philosophically and economically the human habit to consume and to deny the results of their own human behavior. It's very difficult to see that what we do on a day-to-day level, technology, the addiction to gadgets, the fetishism for more, profit, privilege, we use these things, and the priority of consumerism, the desire to have things, belongings, homes, heat, electricity, the electricity grids, the Wi-Fi that's been shut down, the internet that's been shut down, this entire global grid of coal and nuclear power plants and electricity and solar panels and the 1.8 billion automobiles that are pumping right now with fossil fuels and electricity, and the whole world is this huge undulating coma of interrelated addictions to behaviors that result collectively and individually in global death. And within that, we have these miniature things called massacres, ethnic cleansings, and genocide. I just want to pause right here. What's going down in Burma right now with the military, the former military known as the Thamada? It's not at all unique in human history to see clearly that an individual institution like a military kills its own people, so to speak. What isn't our own people? So I made a list that I just kind of in a cursory way this morning of just some of the top 11 well-documented genocide, politicides, acts of mass murder, and what's known as a democide. These acts of incredible, vicious, ongoing violence towards a population. Here, for example, I never really even knew the statistics. The Soviet Gulag state killed 61,911,000 of their own people. Okay? In Myanmar today, not to minimize the murdering of nearly 600 human lives, on top of 75 years of the decimation of many ethnic minorities all around the border areas of the country and inside the country, and more recently, the Rohingya Muslims that have happened in the Rakhine state. But what's going on in Burma today can be, I think, traced psychologically to various tragic components that led to a kind of rupture psychologically and politically. And I think looking on a more global, national level, on a psychological, psychiatric level, we can understand quite clearly why Burma's military is acting out in the way a terrorist organization does and will. But allow me here to take my time, because this is a very big topic. And in fact, the New York Times podcast, I think just yesterday, did something similar to this, where they tried to understand, and I think the reporter who they interviewed dealt with this topic of why is Burma's military killing its own people. I mean, I wrote a book about this in 1989 called Burma, the Next Killing Fields with a question mark, and numerous other books with my colleague Fergus Harlow. We just wrote 2,000 pages in 4 volumes on Burma's Voices of Freedom, which we asked hundreds of political prisoners, government leaders, taxi drivers, workers in cafes, teachers, the same question. What's going on in your country? Why is it happening psychologically? What are the facts? How did it come to be, and how could it be stopped? Read those books. It's fascinating. Teasing out, why do people violate each other? Again, the theme of today's talk, indoctrination, and the cultism, if you will, of active coma, not just paralysis of coma, but the active indoctrination of a programming, a kind of existential cognitive engineering, if you will, the hijacking of the intentions and the states of mind within psyche and consciousness and brain. The next thing you know, you've got robotics and you've got cyborgian satanic behaviors where there's a ritualized sense of torture and institutional terror in Burma today, but not only in Burma. And of course, it goes into the world of democide, ethnic cleansing, and eventually potentially into genocide. And of course, the question becomes back again, looping back to my book, Extinction, X-Rated. We're in a global genocide right now. And generally speaking, we're still playing music and dancing as if it's not happening. And so I think it's also important, just jumping around here, also to look at the concentric circles of active coma within the cave walls, projected on the cave walls of one's own consciousness. That's it. Indoctrination, the concentric cognitive circles of coma and cultism, and how those stencils of behavior and thought patterns, constellations of beliefs, etymologies, xenophobia is one constellation, the denigration, a demonization of other, and how we begin to believe those formations on the cave walls of one's own mind, and we take them to be reality. We don't understand the Aristotelian cave analogy, the projections. We don't turn from the shadow and face the light. And of course, those who are into the Dhamma or into active meditation know the difference between projection and active awakening. That's a very deep form of nonviolence, decoding violence within one's own mind. And so thank you for hanging. I'm just freelancing here today in a terribly unenjoyable topic, but I think if we're going to possibly weigh in here and maybe stop the car before it hits the brick wall of annihilation, stop the terrorist organization in Burma. You know, how can they be stopped? How can you crack the coma of these cultish behaviors of institutionalized terror? I mean, I want to get into that towards the end here. So thank you for tuning in with me. You know, another thing, you know, we think of the word indoctrination and we immediately think of other, not myself. And just a few things that have come to mind that I did some research on some time back for my book, Extinction, X-Rated. You may know this, but I don't know if maybe you're a smoker, maybe you formerly smoked, but you know how seductive it is to taste a cigarette and have the effect of a cognitive, you know, enhancer, if you will, denigrating as nicotine is. And the next thing you know, you're reaching for the little kind of cancer rifle and you're going, put it down, and you're just kind of feeling this bliss of self-murder. Next thing you know, you don't have a throat, you've got a tracheectomy. Next thing you know, you open your lungs, they got big golf ball size of black balls. Your wife, your friend, the planet, welcome to nuclear power, welcome to the consumption of fossil fuels. You know my point, is cigarettes can be lethal, even though there's big pictures on these things today. smoking will lead to emphysema. This will happen to you if you don't stop. Oh, I'll turn it over and deny it. But when you look back at the early days of when cigarettes, became like chic and cool and sexy and the source of happiness, they were like the original MDMA, if you will. And if you trace it back, if I'm not mistaken, you can do the research to correct me. I think it was Freud's nephew, who was living in New York at the time, was part of a PR group, and men primarily had taken up the cigarette, but they wanted to move it into the women of America. And so, if I'm not mistaken, they hired a PR group, and they concocted a plan in which there was some very special day, a women's march for freedom. Okay, I think 1920, still, desiring equality and the right to vote. And so this PR ad company that was hired by Big Tobacco, I'm not going to get too much into Big Tobacco or Big Pharma and, Dr. Anthony Fauci and the vaccine and jab and variants. I mean, there's so many ways to look at indoctrination and coma and compliance. But here, Freud's nephew masterminded, and he hired 10 really attractive models to be in a particular city square in New York City at the end of the day, at the end of the march, and they were to light up a cigarette. They were smokers at the end of this march, and they informed the New York Times of the event, to photograph it. Of course, there was probably some payola involved, and to photograph the end of the march on the emancipation of women's rights. And so they had these 10 women smoking these cigarettes for the first time. And the New York Times photographed the women at the end of the march on Freedom Day, and the headlines were associated with women's rights to be free. Normally it had been the domain of men. Think of that level of tyranny to the human mind and the human body. I mean, that's like saying, kill yourself in the name of health. But isn't that what we're doing with climate change and the homicidal economy that they say that we're all embedded in? And the continual use of petroleum and gasoline, just this one next time. I know it's going to kill me. I know it's going to kill my family. I know the future of life will not exist if I continue to use that which murders life, the nicotine of global annihilation. David Suzuki's brick wall of genocidal climate collapse. So, we criticize, we shame, we try to point to the idiocy of Burma's terrorist group, the Tamada. Well, how could they be killing their own people? And I think it's really a global phenomena that has been generated from time immemorial, that philosophers and psychologists and existentialists and spiritual people have really studied. How could Giorgino Bruno, for example, the astronomer in the 15th century, who was a deeply philosophical savant, and it said that through his own astronomical studies understood that the universe wasn't fixed around Earth and the sun. In fact, it was an infinite universe. And he brought that to the public dialogue and civil discourse, and because the world was a box-shaped world at the time, from the indoctrination, the coercion, and the ongoing violence of the church, the Catholic Church, they took Mr. Bruno, and he refused to recant his concept of infinity. And because of that unwillingness to cough up and agree with the active coma of the church, the active coma of the terrorist group at the time who held religious dogma, the active group of the Third Reich, the active group in Thamada, the terrorist group in Burma. Well, they hung him in a square in Italy, upside down, naked, cut his tongue out, and lit him on fire for his inability to come and begin to show allegiance to active coma, active indoctrination. Welcome to human history, right? Well, look at the result, the savagery of nicotine on the human body from 1920 to 2021. I lost my two elder aunts, both with emphysema, who stopped smoking at the age of 40 and died in their mid-70s. A tragic death to watch them just writhe away like that. And myself, I've smoked for years and years, and one of the most difficult things in order to mindfully challenge the compulsion. How many of you struggle with the compulsion to keep food, proper food in proper quantity in your body, in your mind? How many people hide their addictions behind their lifestyles and pay worship without knowing how they're in homage? Like this Buddha image behind me, they pay homage to their addiction, unknowingly live in the enslavement of food, the enslavement of masturbation, the enslavement of ill behaviors, the enslavement of pharmaceutical drugs, and of course the enslavement of being a participant, an active participant in the coma of our fetish for technology. All of which is just being run by all of us in this active, unrecognized cultism of collective, I hate to say the word, but collective global genocide. It's called an extinction. And with it, the unthinkable callousness to murder most of nature, non-humans, along with the unthinkable arrogance of the human to dominate all other forms of life. I mean, it's a staggering limitation of the psychology, the brain, the DNA, and whatever this is that we're embedded in. Call it the spirit, the terrorizing spirit of shared infinity. And yes, there are those rare individuals, difficult as it is, who through the psychedelic metaphor and the psychedelic molecule, through a lot of bleeding and suffering and inability to belong to the cult of the classroom, and the struggles of living in those four confining, constricting coffin walls of indoctrination, to belong to an education of propaganda in order to grow up and to be conscripted into a war to fight the Vietnamese, the Iranians, the Libyans, the Syrians, the Iraqians, the humans, to kill our own people, the blacks, the Hispanics, the yellows, the greens, the blues, the nature, all of it. We're programmed to lie and to achieve a type of glory, a satisfaction called nationalism, to kill in the name of my flag, my ideology, my religion. Welcome to planet Earth, right? How could Burma, how could the military kill their own people? Okay, I hope you're hanging. Nice to have you today. The topic, indoctrination, the cultism of active coma, aka how come and how is it that the military in Burma, the former military, presently the newest designated terrorist organization on planet Earth, known by the acronym MASAC. I think it's important for all of us to use that. Ming Online, the former general, now a bona fide Pol Pot, Saddam Hussein, bin Laden type figure who has commandeered the former military, and now it is now known as MASAC, the State Administration Council. It's just better to be known as an evil terrorist organization with satanic compulsions, indoctrinated. And I'm going to get into indoctrination in this in a little bit, deeper indoctrination. Okay. We look at these big tobacco, big pharma. I mean, the arms merchants throughout the world. I mean, we've got 15 members on the United Nations Security Council. And if I'm not mistaken, Germany, France, China, Russia, America, I think those 5 are the largest armament manufacturers and exporters in the world. This is the United Nations Security Council to sustain civility, dignity, conscience, and peace in the world. And of course, you can see how can this respected, noble body be driven by murder, by killing, by weapons, by profit, by money. So when we ask about how is it over there in Burma that the military is killing their own people, I think we should really understand that the ethos, the so-called intelligence of the United Nations Security Council is driven by 5 countries that collectively could obliterate the world many times over with their nuclear weapons and with their conventional jets and missiles and so on and so forth. How many of us have been addicted to not just pharmaceutical drugs, but to so-called antidepressants? I mean, it's very fascinating to me to even use the word an antidepressant. Let's concoct a nightmarish cultural circumstances that is inherently sick, the capitalistic cult, belonging to the cult of consumerism, fossil fuel addiction, drug addiction, propaganda, war, testosterone-driven competition, the hatred of others, xenophobia, racism, and let's just make a drug to help mitigate people getting depressed about an incredibly insane culture, okay? There's something so perverse and Manchurian Candidate or a Clockwork Orange about all this. But here we are. And I was reading some time back where the makers of the antidepressant Paxil, trying to expand their market share to Japan, they tried to introduce the drug to the physicians and doctors, and since Japan isn't a psychiatrically driven culture, they've embraced the inherent sadness, if you will, of the existential dilemma to be alive. And unlike, all of us in the Western culture often, I mean, it's either you're smiling with, your incredibly luminous white teeth and white skin and white mind, and we have such a terror of feeling sadness and struggle and fatigue that it's like something's wrong with me. But in Japan, it's more natural. Burma is more natural. They understand the role of what's called dukkha, or the inherent insipidness of phenomenology. No matter what you do and how you sustain it and how you live in the honor of your own presence, you just can't keep the joy alive because it's transient. And then, of course, there's other issues too at play. The Japanese and the Asians don't fear the way that we do, or I should say that I do, that I have, or that a lot of people in the West, the prime of life is like what, 13, in 3 months to about 23 in 2 months. And so this anti-aging belief, this sense of like, I want to flesh it all out so there's not one flaw, not one wrinkle anywhere on my buttock, on my breast, on my cheek, on my lips, on my soul. I am flush. There's something so perversely insane about that. But in the Asian cultures, it's a common phrase in Burma. You don't begin living until you're 40. Here, your life's over often as you're 40. Oh, come on, Alan. But so they sold Paxil to the Japanese, and it wasn't easy. And to make a longer story really short within less than a minute, of course, they gave the drug, and they gave the propaganda, and they gave the rap to all the doctors. And what they did was they realized that in the Japanese culture, as I was just saying, that the human psyche there naturalized sadness. And so what they did, they developed a meme that they spread again throughout Japanese culture, primarily to working women and mothers who were with their children at home. That when you're sad, actually, it's the equivalent of like a flu or a common cold. And they developed a Japanese phrase that your soul has caught cold. So it marginalized and took the radiance of naturalness out of the state of honorable despair, honorable sadness. How many of us know today that there's great honor in naturalizing grieving? We don't get over grieving. Grieving is proportionate to how deeply we loved. And the word attachment is becoming even anathema to the more nuanced elements of not just bonding, but the deeper sense of being embedded in this incredible fabric of cognitive existential phenomenology, and how inextricable our lives are in this embeddedness. And it's not attachment, therefore overcome all attachment and you're going to be a bliss queen. But no, they wanted to get market share to the Japanese, so they sold this meme called "Your Soul Has Caught Cold," and the doctors were seduced into profit by this magic pill. Well, jump time, it took off slowly, but do the research. Antidepressants are multi-billion-dollar industry in Japan, based upon the manipulation of a pharmaceutical company, Big Pharma, selling a lie, a manipulation, a conscious distortion, active Aristotelian coma. You don't see that it's a manipulation, a coercion, a manufacturing, as Noam Chomsky talked about it. The engineering of consent to do things, ingest things, and to say things, and to think things that are contraband to your heart, your love, your family, your nation. People often vilify the Arab Muslim as these idiots that would dare create such stupid ideology as to become a suicide bomber. It's like the ultimate vilification of the sacred, holy, that you would kill yourself, and the more people you murdered in that killing, the more holy the action was. Co-joining this type of suicide killer with the sanctity of Allah, the sanctity of God, the sanctity of God. And it's like this, there's something, it's like wherever we can religion bash, wherever we can gender bash, wherever we can ethnic bash, that kind of existential xenophobia that gets into sorry to use a medical term, the metastasizing of evil to the point of demonic violence, okay? Yuckity yuck yuck, right? Yuckity yuck yuck. And yep, those Muslim, idiot, soulless, demonic, Al-Qaeda, ISIL sickos and yet, okay, I've done a little bit of study on the topic. You know, you look at the Japanese nationalists during World War II, preceded the whole Islamic onslaught of the so-called, I have no weapon except my conscience. Okay, it wasn't originated by Allah or Arabs or Muslims or Christian Arabs or Buddhist Arabs like me. But in Japan, you look, you study Japanese history, World War II, the suicide bomber, the kamikaze, okay? But the kamikaze wasn't just taking some high-end jet and ramming it into the flight deck of an aircraft carrier or a U.S. destroyer or into a manufacturing unit somewhere or into Pearl Harbor. These men and women were the intelligentsia of Japanese educated culture. There was no shortage of highly educated with degrees, the hell ever that means. Degrees in philosophy, degrees in Shintoism, degrees in probably alternative medicine, degrees in history, all the degrees of all the educational institutions in Japan. These were the ones who lined up in mass to want to train to become kamikaze, meaning I am so dedicated to the emperor, to nationalism, to the genome of the Japanese, and that goes right down into probably deep Buddhistic beliefs. It's a Buddhist culture that goes right into nationalism, and the next thing you know, they're being trained in all types of ways, to sacrifice, consciously choose as an act of compassionate conscience, to use their humble human life to take out as many of the infidel, many of the demons, many of the so-called enemy. Studying the psychology of demonization, vilification, the psychology of demonization. I think meditation, in many ways for me, has been the deep study, the psychological, cognitive, and when I've done the psychedelic in smaller, medium, or higher doses with the DMT at times, or even the MDMA molecule, it so illuminates the interior theater, if you will, of how Alan Clements, in an unrecognized, unmindful moment, confused with the stencilization, the choreography of my own conditioning, inculcated with my education, my belief systems, and my eyes wide open, I am seeing the constellation of them being wrong. Demonization. And if I'm in Bosnia at the time of the war, and I'm Bosnian or Croatian Catholic or Serbian Muslim or Bosnian Muslim, the next thing you know, based upon my inability to understand the stencilization of kamikaze, I'm going to train in whatever I need to do to kill as many as you, the enemy, as possible. Welcome, AKA, why is the military in Burma killing their own people? Let me read my list again. In the 20th century, pre-20th century, 133 million people, you and me, brothers and sisters before us, have been killed by their own people. Soviet Gulag State, 61,911,000. Communist China Purge, 35,236,000. How could they kill their own people? Nazi Genocide State, 20,946,000. Systematically gassed, raped, carved to death, experimentally, just demonically, their lives taken. Japan's military, 5,964,000, signing up, let me kill in the name of Buddha nationalism. The Khmer Rouge, Pol Pot, 2,035,000. These are just conservative estimates of mass murder, genocide, ethnic cleansing, democide. Turkey's genocidal purge, 1,883,000. The Vietnamese war state, 1,670,000. Poland's ethnic cleansing, where Poland had an ethnic cleansing, 1,585,000. Orwellian North Korea, 1,663,000. The barbarous Mexico, 1,417,000. And of course, just simply the federal state of Russia in their purges of 1,066,000. That's just the top 11. The selling of Paxil, an antidepressant that, in my humble estimation, you know, this is not some satirical joke. I love antidepressants. No, it doesn't make... I got on to Prozac. I was the first person that I ever met in California in my meditation retreats, because I had a long history of pharmaceutical use, joy, bliss, rapture, and fatigue. I saw a meditator who had been very restless over the years, a deep confession. And I asked him, I said, how is it that you're so still? He says, Alan, I've got this new drug. It's called Prozac. And it's just like, man, this stuff is like low-grade MDMA on a sustained basis. And I went to a psychiatrist friend and got some, and it was like, holy shit, man. This is, I loved MDMA. I did it therapeutically, never recreationally, right? All the right political and spiritual things to make it spiritually, politically right. And I got addicted for the 11 years hence on Prozac because it felt good, just like 27 years of nicotine. Just like my aunt, Olga, and Evie, who died of emphysema based upon Freud's nephew selling cigarettes through these beautiful 10 models, never smoking for the first time. They called those cigarettes in the New York Times, go there and read it, the torches of freedom. Suicide bomber, no. Self-suicide killing. How could Burma's military kill its own people? How could you and me kill our own daughter and son based upon unbridled, I use the word, the fetishism, it must be a word deeper than addiction, the pornography of the soul. I'm not going to shame the human psyche any more than the psyche shames itself. But what we do in the name of God, Allah, Buddha, truth, freedom, any name whatsoever can be bastardized, and we can commit genocide in the name of the Lord. Welcome to the insurrections. Welcome to the church. You know, the Tamil Tigers, the women in Sri Lanka, a country I love, was there for a monk, as a monk, a Buddhist monk. Hindus, you know, tying grenades onto their beautiful Shiva bodies, their sacred mind and hearts, and walking into the camps and villages and businesses of Buddhists and just exploding themselves in the name of Krishna. Not Allah, Krishna. Hanuman, not Allah, Hanuman. Shiva, not Allah. And how we so easily marginalize, vilify, demonize, and then create a kind of metastasized xenophobia, the psychology that vilifies other. the psychology that vilifies other and then develops a type of justified, righteous, indignant, joyous, rapturous sense of killing in the name of. Go back and listen to that song by, is it Jack de la Roche from Rage Against the Machine? I remember back in Yugoslavia, that was really quite killing in the name of. And it's so powerful. It just demands that we enter the phantasm of evil. It demands that we crack the active coma of concentric circles of false agreement to behaviors and speech that denigrate self and other. Okay, I'll come to the end here. Burma, Myanmar. Why are the military, the former military now as a terrorist organization, killing their own people? Beyond knowing that it's a very human behavior, not just to rape, kill, murder, and behead, but to do it even to one's own mother, brother, sister, family, community, and religious followers. Besides the perverse normalization of that throughout history, I don't agree with it, but it's like it gives me the shivers and the chills to think that that is the context of our lives, along with the ongoing denigration of the environment and non-humans through the anthropocentric, human-driven, incredibly addictive behaviors that we all are a part of with our phones. 6 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours, 9 hours, likes, swipe, views, digital nomads, digital assassins, digital murderers. How come my phone isn't an automatic rifle sold by the genocidal nuclear-powered dictator in China? Oh, it is, Alan. God, I've got a rocket launcher right in my hand, and I'm killing my own daughter. I'm killing the embryo, the unborn embryo in every animal and child and girl and woman ever to be born with my phone. I am complicit. Just had to get that out. And so in Burma, though, let me just take my time here, because this is... Do you ever get pissed off? I mean, just annoyed, irked, justified judgment. Look at the divorces, the estrangements, the anger. How many relationships arise in chemistry, right? The incredible allure of smell, of taste, of touch, of fluids, of heart, of eroticism, of romance, of marriage, of children, family, shared work, and the next thing you know, based on some arbitrary constellation of conditioning triggered by something in usually the other, the crack happens. The next thing you know, you're fighting it out. There's not enough money to pay legal fees. You would never be in the room again with that mother. Multiply that times nations and countries, and welcome to planet Earth, right? Well, Burma is an extraordinary country. Probably everywhere in the world is extraordinary. But specifically for me, I went there in 1977, ended up going back again in 79, where I ordained in New York and then lived in Rangoon. Traveled the country numerous times, was able to learn the language to some extent, met many interesting, phenomenal people, some teachers, some mentors, some uncles and aunts, some friends. I was blessed to meet the former Prime Minister, U Nu, his family, specifically his youngest daughter. I know the history of Burma pretty well, probably better than my own country of America. But I was also able to spend a lot of time, years, with the former general under the first dictator, Ne Win. His name was U Tin U. He's 93 years old. He's had a stroke. He doesn't speak. But he and I were deeply connected as monks together when he got out of prison after being put in prison for 6 years by the dictator. I also became very close with Daw Aung San Suu Kyi's mentor, colleague, and friend, the former colonel in the military, U Chi Mong, along with the presently detained in jail U Win Tain, who's 81 years old, who knows Ming Online very well. In fact, went to the same military academy up in the northern part of the country, and is a senior to Ming Online. The others, obviously, they're seniors as well. I mean, and my point here is I've really asked them, along with about 100 other former political prisoners, and they're all former political prisoners as well, how is it that this military, this rogue military, seems to delight in persecuting, raping, killing, torturing their own people and their own ethnic people of Myanmar, of which there's 135 distinct ethnicities, 100 languages. And I think the Burmans, I mean, it's like you meet a Burman in Burma, and they've got a little bit of Kachin, a little bit of Shan, a little bit of Mon. I mean, all of us, I mean, we're all part of everything, right? But in Burma, it's like the fabric of interethnicity, interreligious connectivity, and an ancient culture that goes back way 4,000 or 5,000 years, temples from 2,600 years ago, the Shwedagon, which has been pillaged by the terrorist group. They peeled the gold off it and took all the rubies, man. Unthinkable behavior, Masak. But I've asked, my point here is, I have asked the people who have, their lives have been dedicated to democracy in Burma, who were part of the military. I've asked Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, your father founded the Tamada. How is it has gone so astray from the original principles of dignity and protecting the people to killing and committing ethnic genocide of the people? Okay. This is my hypothesis. This is my belief. It's kind of taking trauma theory, psychological trauma theory on a national, global level. Okay, Burma's a sovereign nation for time immemorial. I think in the early 1800s, Winston Churchill's father, if I'm not mistaken, was the Governor General of India. White, I'm going to emphasize white imperialistic, genocidal denigration of the Indian continent, Indian subcontinent. Let's do conquest, subjugation, slavery. And that's what they did. They did it in America. They did it in Australia. Just look in Australia's history, where I think it was against the law not to kill an indigenous Aboriginal human being. I think it was against the law not to kill upon sight up until, was it in the 1940s, maybe even the 1950s? But look to see. And then there was the thing called the Black Wave, in which I think like 100 miles from the coast inland, 3 or 4 deep, the imperialists walked up 1,200 miles of the eastern coast and killed every human being that they could see. Indigenous populations denigrated, massacred. Oh, they're not killing their own people. They're killing human beings. Oh, they're lower than human beings. Right. So studying this issue for me is the demonization, the denigration of others. Deplorables, Jews, transsexuals, queers, lesbians, religious people, the equivalent of rat, vermin, make them so insect-like that it is nothing, as it's been said, to listen to Mozart or Beethoven at night and go to Dachau and Auschwitz in the day and just kill with delight. Talk about compartmentalization, propaganda, indoctrination. How does the human psyche do that? Of course, welcome to Psychology 101 or 1001. Welcome to existential Buddhism. Welcome to the necessity for me of conscientious use of the psychedelic. It's not medicine. It is radical, lightning bolt existentialism that obliterates the deepest recesses of perverse attachment to constellations of self and other denigration. It cracks the coma of one's own cultism to the concentric circles. And if it's fueled with greed and anger, you'll kill in the name of those constellations. The psychedelic, I think we're just beginning to understand with the conscious use of that in the right conditions. A president, a prime minister, a priest, a politician, Masak in Burma. Hello, talk about not conversion therapy, but extraction therapy, extraction of lobha dosa moha, cracking the coma of self-collusion with active coma. Coma here is a mild word for talking about the germination potentially of rape, murder, and genocide. It all happens in the human mind, connected to its biblical existential DNA. God and the devil are fighting there, always mainlining it through eternity. Welcome to the existential nature of human consciousness in context to infinity. We must come to terms with stopping the genocide in existential existence. We must stop extinction. The Buddha talked about the only extinction there was in this world was the extinction of greed, anger, and delusion. Very interesting. I wrote about this. I created this in this book, Extinction X-Rated. I really, really invite you to get the book and talk to me about your experience. It's my best shot artistically, psychologically, creatively, and through a sustained engagement with the psychedelic for myself during the writing to try to come to terms with how can I interrupt the collusion with my own coma. That's it. So back to the close of the talk with Winston Churchill's father in India at the time. He decided that the country of Burma, Myanmar, would be the ultimate crown jewel to give to the hierarchy in his own country of England. Invasion. 2 obliterating wars with a peaceful sovereign nation. Jump time, 1950. Mao Zedong's genocidal rapture. Tibet, the Tibetan plateau. Buddhism, Dalai Lama, heathens, ignorant fools, Buddha statues, religion, the numismatic, the high-altitude psychedelic of transcendent, the bodhisattvic concept of embodied birth after birth, motivated by compassion to help alleviate the suffering of all beings everywhere in all dimensions. How aberrant a fantasy. The heathens in the Tibetan plateau must die in mass. Kill them, O brothers and sisters. And we have 2.5 million Tibetans genocided in the name of the evil meme projected onto the peaceful, loving people of Tibet. A footnote. Burma, the same thing in the 1800s. Two incredibly violent, imperialistic, oppressive, denigrating, enslaving, torturous. The word W-A-R, war, is meaningless. It's like a picnic. Imagine right now, we could see the footage of mangled children, dogs, women being gouged and raped and beheaded and debreasted by these savage white men infiltrating another country from England, and the persecution of cut their tongues out, cut their vaginas open, cut their embryos open, take the evil of these heathens from them, conquer them, oppress them, make them slaves. Welcome to planet Earth. That's why I never want to be born a human being again. I don't want to talk in this way. I want to celebrate the sacred in other dimensions, and they exist. I've been there. I will go there. I am there a lot of the time now. Brothers and sisters who want to come along, help me come along with you. I'll help you come along with me. I want to be born with the sacred beings in a world where there isn't war, genocide, and rape. I've got a few years left maybe here. Use it well. Speak out, right? Let's become so disgusted with violence and denigration and our collusion with self-generated cultism cast on the cave walls of our own consciousness unknowingly, and we project outward through our senses. You evil, you must die. Welcome to Burma. Welcome to England. And for 130 years, right? I don't know exactly how much time the white supremacist of England dominated Burma, subjugated them. But I've traveled through the British Museum in London, the Burmese department. I've gotten special passes and been given special tours there. Again, coming back to the 200 political prisoners that I've interviewed, former generals and colonels in Burma's former dictatorship, where they abandoned the ideology of that. How is it that your own military kills its own people? Well, my point here is the people of Burma, Aung San Suu Kyi's father and a group of other 30 men and women, in World War II, had bombs rained down that could not be seen or known, obliterating the cities, trying to eradicate the invaders, the Japanese fascists. I don't know what it would be like, but hearing a gunshot is pretty scary. I've been in those situations. I can't imagine what it must have been like in Vietnam, and I've been to Hue in the central part of Vietnam. And as far as the eye can see, you can see land that is hard as concrete from Agent Orange to exterminate the foliage in order to kill more viciously. But B-52 bombers that would drop bombs for months and years that would create 50-meter deep cavities on the earth. Imagine living in a country, Burma, where bombs are dropping. And that is the result. I'm not sure that the bombs were, as stealth as they were in the Vietnam War back at that time. But then again, there was the nuclear bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I just imagine the unremitting auditory trauma of mass death and murder and violence, all the while knowing anywhere you go, you could be raped and killed, tortured. My teacher, Seda U Pandita, told me early on in his life as a monk how his blood boiled seeing Japanese soldiers raping his sister nuns. Standing in frozen rage to look at that violation, the desecration of the sacred. Multiply that times a generation, 2, 3. The outrage and the trauma, the helplessness and the Dhamma from invaders, fascists, white imperialists, and eventually Daw Aung San Suu Kyi's father decides, we want our country back. Independence, war, and there Britain gives up their prize jewel after nearly, 100 years of imperialistic subjugation and slavery, torture, and a form of genocide. Imagine asking an Aboriginal in Australia how they feel about their lives. Imagine asking an Indigenous Indian in Canada how they feel about the white imperialistic genocidal oppressors. Imagine asking an American Indian how they feel about America. Imagine asking one of the 135 ethnicities in Burma how they feel about the white imperialist occupation, genocide, and World War II of their people, of them. The famous treatise on mindfulness by the late Venerable Mahasi Sayadaw was written, and you can read, he could hear the bombs dropping in the north of Burma near his monastery. Imagine that as a writing retreat. What that does to your soul, your cell, your blood. Burma's liberated from the oppressors. Daw Aung San Suu Kyi's father, young, early 30s, with his colleagues and comrades, we have done the unimaginable. We have shaken off through blood, violence, and intensity of commitment the oppressors. And a political rival comes in to the Secretariat building in Yangon, Rangoon, and assassinates the young General Aung San and 6 other cabinet members. Bang, 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 bang. Daw Aung San Suu Kyi is 2 years old. A prime minister is now anointed. Prime Minister U Nu. Deeply religious, deeply committed to Buddhism and Dhamma and meditation. They start their own fledgling military armed forces founded by the late General Aung San. Read his speeches if you want to understand an incredibly visionary young man. The bold declaration of democracy and freedom and the nobility of an armed forces that is fully committed to the protection and the safety and the enhancement of the people, not the enemy of the people. Prime Minister U Nu appointed as the head of the military a man named Ne Win, infamous Ne Win. And yet we have this magnificent new democracy in South Asia. An economy that was in some ways getting very close to that of Tokyo in Japan. A land so fertile and rich and magnificent, a tapestry of existential, religious, philosophical, agrarian, urban, sophisticated, highly intelligent, radically cool, musically talented, theatrical, poetic, satirical, comedic. Listen to the culture that lived through the violences and what they've done to emerge in education, arts, medicine. Burma is rich. Those of you who have traveled there, many people say it is the most magnificent country in the world they've ever dreamt of visiting. And in 1962, this man, Ne Win, does exactly what Ming Online did February 1st, a military coup d'etat, and incarcerated Prime Minister U Nu. 1972, 82, 92, 2002, 2012, 2021. Here we are today. A succession of dictators living out a cultural, deep cultural legacy of bombs, warfare, rape, subjugation, torture by the imperialistic white hydra, the murderous white imperialistic machine that subjugated the people, made them feel really small, if not insignificant or invisible. Not to mention, who can you meet who didn't have a relative tortured, jailed, incarcerated, raped, imprisoned? And then, for whatever reason, this man, Ne Win, went from the birth of a democratic nation into what he called Burma's socialistic way, which soon became his way of nationalizing all enterprise and business. My supporters as a monk owned the movie industry in Burma, a thriving movie industry. Daw Yin Yin and U So Win told me all about the history of Burma, from the royal family in Mandalay, their relationship with Ne Win, their incarceration under him, the thieving of all of their belongings, the industry, everything was taken. Even let their house burn to the ground in Mandalay without intervening. Whatever went on in this man's mind, this Stalin's mind, this Xi Jinping mind, this Hitler-esque mind, it grew in the cultism of the Coma of a fabricated identity that went from a military general into a dictator, into an evil terrorist, where rather than what we do in America is to export our violence and subjugate other countries, Iraq, Afghanistan, Vietnam, and subjugate and murder other people through proxy sale of our weapons, more weapons, cliched as it is to say, we sell as a country than all other countries combined. So we're asking about how come the Burmese military kill their own people. And I'm pointing here to, from a psychiatric, psychological, spiritual, existential point of view, they're born as humans into the genome of a cumulative greed, anger, and delusion, and they're also dealing with a social, political, cultural rupture that I would call catastrophic national, cultural, individual trauma over decades. And that was from the wars and subjugation of the white imperialists, and then under dictatorship, where they have been relegated to non-existent humors. Really, really, really subjugated. And some of the people in Burma, they're so breathtakingly humble. They would never dare to question a parent, never dare to question an elder, never dare to question a nun or monk, never dare to question someone who is of a higher order than you. There's something deep in that level of cultural, I'm not saying blind obedience, but it's a culture that takes care of the elderly. You see homes where there's generations of family living under one roof. The older you get in Burma, the more majestic and beautiful you become, unlike in my country. Oh, just put them into an old age home and let them rot on a tube with pharmaceutical drugs. I mean, I know that's strange and intense to say, but Burma is a breathtakingly culture that elevates the aging process. It's beautiful. And yet you have this dictatorship on top of it all. I think what we're seeing in Burma with the military is nothing other than indoctrination through the plausible understanding of fear of the foreigner, a terrible fear of democracy as it's understood in the Western hemispheres. I've often said I was encouraged, for example, to really understand the mind of the so-called enemy, the dictator, when I became involved in Burma's activism. My teachers and mentors all told me, we're not here to demonize and to vilify, but to understand how we can awaken the latent conscience in the mind of evil. And so that process to me is, how is it that Ming Online can do this? And it's not dictatorship from the top down. It's the dictatorial meme. It's a combination of trauma, cultural obedience, a type of unrecognized, xenophobic, those white imperialists, those denigrators, those killers. Look what they do. Look at the hypocrisy. They're telling us about universal human rights. Look at the war in Iraq. Look at the war in Afghanistan. Look at Syria. Look at Libya. They're liars. They're frauds. Look at Mr. Trump. Look at Mr. Biden. Look at the United Nations. They have blood on their hands. They're complicit with genocide, murder, weapons. Why would we ever want to belong to the cult of the West? So even as an American, we know that. We know that we're in a lying government, a lying regime, a violent regime. It's not the only thing. We have some semblance of freedom of speech and freedom of press, but by and large now, cancellation culture is becoming even more radically real. We don't even know that we can trust our friends and families to have an honest, so-called civil discourse. I wrote this book, Extinction X-rated. I really hope you get it. Not for the lighthearted. Head on with indoctrination. Head on with our participation in the brick wall of self-annihilation and global genocide. Head on in our complicity with rape and violence. And it deals as intimately as I can through the psychedelic, the DMT, and the metaphorical psychedelic. What can I do artistically, creatively, and existentially to crack the individual and the consensus coma of complicity with mass annihilation through mass extinction, consumerism, the fetish for gadgets, the phone, my own nuclear war with my phone, and my complicity with violence. I still pay taxes so that people can die on my watch, on my dime. It's sick. We're embedded in a sick tapestry. And in Burma, lack of education, lack of economic possibility. Burma, a rich culture, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, and physically, under the denigrating, oppressive succession of dictators. How do they kill their own people? It's like a mafia boss. They want to sustain their privilege, their money, their fine wine. It's like Kim Jong-un in North Korea, man. He wants his girls. He wants his pool. He wants his jet. He wants his penis. He wants his wine. He wants his loot. He is just a replica of the same thing with Putin, with Biden, with the United Nations, and with Mossack in Burma, and Xi Jinping in China, and most every man and woman in power. They are mainlining the drug of profit, privilege, prestige, on and on. It's almost like embarrassing to even use those words. Meanwhile, collectively, we as a species are actively participating in the active use of the crack cocaine of fossil fuel and fetishism through the unbridled addiction to gadgets, computers, phones, cars, planes, and everything else that we do in order to connect, relate, blah, 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 Alan, create selfie after selfie so that you can broadcast ad nauseum that only a few people listen because the algorithm narrows and narrows you down the memory hole. How in the hell can the military in Burma kill its own people? Power, privilege, and profit, and prestige, and the continuity of those unrecognized conditions rooted in indoctrinating people in the cult of their profit, their privilege. Running dogs, running soldiers, cultists. Give them a chance to kill. Look at those terrorists on the streets of Monyuan, Mandalay, and Rangoon. The videos are revealing a type of demonic fetishism where they're enjoying, delighting in taking boys and girls off of buses and brutally harming and killing them, taking them to their interrogation centers, to their prison camps, torturing them and telling the families, come get them. Institutionalized terror. Because you got a cult at the top. A cult, the Kim Jong-un cult in Naypyidaw. The Xi Jinping cult in Beijing in Naypyidaw. Call it toxic masculinity, fortified by systemic, cultural, national, decades long of trauma, overlapping wars and genocides. I read a list of 11 major pre-20th century genocides, democides, politicized and mass murders. Soviet Gulag state, 61,911,000 people. What are their names? 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years, 30, 50 years from now, will there be a planet Earth? Will there be a Myanmar? Will Burma be the next Tibet? Will China be so large it's a one-state planet? Yes. Welcome to April 6, 2021, where over there is no longer over there. I'll close with this. I feel we're all called now to rise up into the radiance, the radiant liberty to know one's own mind on the terms of the ancient, beautiful qualities of critical thinking, independent emotional reflection, ethical self-inquiry, the fidelity to dance in your own unique freedom. If there's ever a time in human history, probably it's been said by all women and men from time immemorial, the radiance, the importance of freedom, that 3-page doctrine that guides the conscience, so to speak, in the United Nations Security Council, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 30 articles agreed upon by all civilized countries in the world. Dignity and conscience, freedom from fear and need, all beings born equal in dignity and rights, irregardless of economic, religious position. Freedom to think, freedom to act, freedom to convene peacefully in one's religion. Today we're called upon to breathe in the radiance of this doctrine and make it a visceral genetic experience, cracking the coma of complicity to anything that denigrates the radiance of shared freedom. Each of us are called today to be a participant in what Aung San Suu Kyi calls a revolution of the human heart, what Václav Havel called a revolution of human consciousness. We must learn how to state the obvious, but so overly underestimated. We must learn how to control our own mind. The word meditation and mindfulness is to control the impulses of self and other denigration. We must control and overcome addiction. Right back to where I started, how hard it is for some people living in the wealth of their home, writing their books, singing their songs, and they can't control what they put in their mouth and what comes out of their mouth. And they spend their lives dieting. The cult of me controlling my food intake. Over and over and over again. Over and over and over again. The cigarette, the nicotine of denial. Keeping freedom alive. I would say freedom is very much honored with innocence of spirit. It's very easy to become calloused, predictive, in a box, unknowingly. I'm on a dance floor with unlimited possibilities to move, and I'm doing my indoctrination like the Catholic Church did to Giorgio Bruno for telling us the world was infinite. How do we create a boxed shape psyche upon our own impulse to know that we live in unlimited, infinite possibilities? May I invite you, and to invite your friends and family, wherever they are, whomever we meet, let us learn how to kiss for the first time. Let us learn how to hold hands intimately, openly, freely, as much as possible for the first time. Activism isn't just confrontation To me, it is the simplicity of relaxing the fear of needing to have it on our terms, of doing without. When I stopped smoking, I sat down and did what I did in a monastery and learned how to take the speed, the neurotic momentum out of my narrative. Slow down. Consumerism is more, the fetish, addictions, more, violence, shoot. Sex, eroticism, porn, more. Slow down. The tantra of consciousness is for me to slow down. Relax. Take the neurotic speed out of eating. Feel again. It's not emptiness. It is the fullness of a vibrational sensitivity of the human heart in its most natural, unconditioned, uncontrived state of being. It's what I loved about my interviews with former political prisoners. They could not move out of their cages, and yet they kept the radiance of freedom alive. How beautiful. So may all of us keep freedom active in our lives, innocence in our lives, and let us keep a very radiant relationship to the country of Myanmar and Burma right now, and do all that we possibly can to give our three-finger salute to the good people of Burma in deep solidarity with your revolution of the human heart. You won, you are winning, and you will win even more than you can imagine. I do believe that. Let all good people worldwide unite in Burma's struggle and make it our own struggle in our own home, in our own city, in our own village. Let us confront the propaganda of lies everywhere that we see them. Let there be a new birth, a new world, a revolution that does not stop this time until we've given birth to peace and to sanctity and to the future of freedom beyond our own life. From my heart to yours, thank you for tuning in. And if you're inclined, Extinction X-Rated on Amazon worldwide, on my website. And thank you for being in my life, and I'll see you tomorrow at 9:30.